Good morning Year 3, it's Miss Birch and today for maths I am learning to apply my knowledge of tenths to solve problems. So for our starter we're just going to practice counting in tenths. So the counting stick is worth 1 whole and we're going to practice counting from 1/10 to 10 tenths. Okay, so 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10 and 10/10. So now we have a whole. And I just want you to think about what happens next when we get to 10/10. Where does the next step go to? 9/10, 10/10, 11/10. So that can either be 11/10 or 1 whole and 1/10. Now when you're doing this, if you need a bit of help, you can write down each tenth. So you can write the fraction above: 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10 and 10/10. Now let's practice counting backwards. 10/10, 9/10, 8/10, 7/10, 6/10, 5/10, 4/10, 3/10, 2/10 and 1/10. Now hopefully you were able to join in on that with me. So for today's mild, it is I can show how I solve problems of tenths. So we're showing how we get to our answers. So for this example, I'm going to go through one example with you and then give you one question of your own. So true or false? 5/10 is 2/10 smaller than 7/10. So we'll read that again. 5/10 is 2/10 smaller than 7/10. So how we'd work this out is we look at what's really important in the question. So 5/10 and 7/10 are really important. So let's find them on our counting stick. We've got 5/10 is here and we've got 7/10 here. Now this question says true or false? 5/10 is 2/10 smaller than 7/10. So if we start at 7/10 and count back until we get to 5/10, let's see how many tenths smaller it is. 7/10, 6/10, 5/10. So if we look at how many jumps we've made there, we've made 2 jumps. So from our workings out, we can see that 5/10 is 2/10 smaller than 7/10. So 1, 2. So we'll write true. And we've shown our working out here. 5/10 is 2/10 smaller than 7/10. So it's really important to read the question. So for your go, true or false? 5/10 is 2/10 larger than 3/10. So the really important words in that question is 5/10 are 2/10 larger than 3/10. 5/10 is 2/10 larger than 3/10. So if you have a go at working that out using the same method that we used on the example question, if you pause this video, have a go at doing that and then press play once you think you've worked it out. Moving on, we're going to go on to the spicy success criteria, which is I can compare tenths to solve problems. So we'll go through one example together and the question is, which shape has a larger amount of tenths shaded? So we've looked through this question and found a key word, which is larger. So we're looking for the shape that has the most amount of tenths shaded. So first of all, it'd be really important for us to check that this is 10, has 10 tenths. So it's really important for us to check that this is 1 whole and has 10 tenths. So let's count 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths and 10 tenths. So there we are, we can write down 10 tenths. We know there's 10 tenths in that shape. And let's check in shape B. 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths and 10 tenths. So we know that there are 10 tenths in that shape too. Excellent. So now we are looking at which has a larger amount shaded. So for each shape, we should count how many tenths are shaded. So in this shape, we've got 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths. So 3 tenths of this shape are shaded, 3 tenths. Now let's count how many tenths are shaded in this shape. We have 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths. So this shape has 5 tenths shaded. So next we need to answer the question, which shape has a larger amount of tenths shaded? And looking at how many tenths are shaded in each shape, there's 3 in shape A and 5 in shape B. Which one is larger? It's shape B, because we know that 5 is larger than 3. 5 tenths is larger than 3 tenths. So shape B has a larger amount of tenths shaded. Oh, shaded. Lovely. Now it's your turn. So can you answer this question by yourselves if you just pause the video and have a go? Which shape has a smaller amount of tenths shaded? Which shape has a smaller amount of tenths shaded? Shape A or shape B? Have a go there. So our last stage of the success criteria is hot, 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 and that is I can use my knowledge of tenths to justify my answers when solving problems. And a really key question here is, how do you know? So we want to know how you know that that's right and you've got the right answer. So here's our example question that we're going to answer together. Teddy is counting in tenths. 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 10 tenths, 1 11th, 2 11ths, 3 11ths. Can you spot his mistake? So here, for us to help work out what Teddy's got wrong, I've drawn our counting stick with our 10 tenths on it, and we know that 10 tenths is 1 whole. And we know that along here, as we're counting up in tenths, the only numbers that are changing are the numerators, the top numbers of the fraction, and the denominators are all staying the same because we're counting in tenths, aren't we? So when Teddy counts up, he says 7 tenths, 8 tenths, it's looking good, 9 tenths, 10 tenths, and then he says 1 11th. So Teddy thinks that when you get to 10 tenths, which we know is 1 whole, that you start counting in 11ths. But we know that if you are counting in tenths, the denominator should stay the same and the numerator should change. So it would be, after 10 tenths, the denominator would stay the same and the numerator would increase 1 more to 11 tenths. Now this can be written another way because we know that 10 tenths is 1 whole, so it could be 1 whole, 1 and 1 tenth, because he's got 10 tenths, which is 1 whole, and 1 more, which is 1/10. So can you spot Teddy's mistake? So what we would write for this answer to the question is, Teddy thinks that when you reach 10 tenths, you start counting in 11ths. Then we can say, I know this is wrong because 10 tenths is 1 whole and after is 11 tenths. It's 11 tenths. There we are. Okay, so you can answer this question on your own using the same method to work out the mistake. So Martha is counting in tenths. 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 11 tenths, 12 tenths. Can you spot her mistake? So when you answer this question, I'd like you to tell us the mistake that Martha has made and how do you know Martha's mistake is wrong? And I want you to show me in your working so you can use the counting stick to show your workings out for this question too. So if you pause the video and have a go at this question. Finally, here we have a challenge, which is to write 15 tenths in another way. So I don't mean write out 15 tenths. I don't mean like that. So we want 15 tenths or 15 tenths written another way. Have a think about how you could do that if we know that 10 tenths are 1 whole. That's just an extra challenge, so have a think about that.